Very good morning to all the participating students and scholars of international relations, and welcome all to this unique workshop on prospects and challenges to development cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. I am Dr. Sridhar Bhagwatla from the Indian School of Business, and I'll be the convener for this workshop for the entire day. In fact, ISB, in partnership with the US Consulate Hyderabad, is happy to organize this workshop, and we look forward for an active participation from all the scholars. And I would urge you all to take maximum benefit from this workshop, as we have got together some of the best minds in this space. And after successful participation, please earn your certificates. I would like to start the proceedings for the day with the reference of the book, The India Way, Strategies for an Uncertain World, written by our own External Affairs Minister, Professor S. Jaishankar, published in 2020. So I think this book should be a part of the curriculum for the students of international relations. In this book, he made a reference which says that the interests of India, the postures of Japan, the adjustments by the Americans, the ambitions of China, the confidence of Australia, and the awareness of the ASEAN will help reinvent the Indo-Pacific. And I'm sure this workshop will help us to understand the reinvention process. So with this reference, I would like to invite my senior colleague, Kumaraguru, Director External Relations of ISB, to deliver the welcome remarks and also to talk about the partnership with the US Consulate that we have. Over to you, Guru.
Thank you very much, Sridhar, for sort of setting the context in such a very nice way. I want to sort of keep my comments very brief. We have a long day ahead of all of us, but I can promise you, and I'm very hopeful and confident that it will be a very enriching one for sure. So it will be one of those Fridays that is well spent, right? And so it's not one of those Fridays where you at the end of the day say, "Thank God it's Friday," kind of a thing. But you know, this is as Sean and I were sort of joking just a couple of minutes ago. ISB is a fine example of Indo-US cooperation. And it's not just in the way we were structured and we came into existence, but also the way we have sort of used opportunities and occasions to partner with, with US institutions, and also in this specific instance, as earlier on many occasions, with the State Department and the Consulate here in Hyderabad. And this particular initiative on Indo-Pacific fine examples of the cooperation that we sort of work towards and strive towards. Sridhar has spoken about the workshop. This is part of a larger initiative on Indo-Pacific. We did a media workshop for journalists a couple of months ago. In a normal world, pre-COVID, post-COVID world, and we don't know when that post-COVID world would be, this would have been actually perhaps the time when we would have had a full-fledged conference, in a month or so. But of course, mindful of all the COVID protocols and everything else, we moved the larger conference that will be part of this initiative to a later part of the year or early 2022. But we said we should use the occasion, and we've all now used to this online events and conferences. So we said, let's use this to our advantage to convene scholars in international relations who are interested in Indo-Pacific, either because of a direct academic interest or otherwise, to benefit from several senior thinkers and distinguished practitioners who worked in this area, who continue to sort of think about this area. And we have a set of very eminent speakers here. I'm very pleased that Admiral Luthra is here with us today. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Amrita is here as well. And we have two other speakers. Manoj will be speaking in the second half, and also Professor Chintamani Mahapatra will also be joining us later on as well. I'm not going to get into introductions because that's something that Sridhar will do. So if you will sort of, excuse me on that one. But I do want to sort of just say that please take the maximum sort of, make use of the day to our scholars, to students who are here with us. This is a great opportunity, like I said earlier, to not just listen to, but also interact. And I think in some sense, more importantly, challenge the speakers on some of the ideas that they may present. And with your own sort of ideas, and sort of engage in debate with all the sort of, constraints that a Zoom platform, provides or does not, right? Because I think that's the true purpose of a workshop like this, that, we all should go back, both the presenters and the speakers and the participants, more enriched at the end of the day. With those few words, I also would be failing in my duty if I don't acknowledge Salil here, who's a partner in crime from the US Consulate. Thank you, Salil. But with those few words, I do want to welcome Sean Luthra, who's the Chief of Political and Economic Section at the US Consulate General. But I hope you will, in your opening remarks also, Sean, talk about your own Indo-Pacific sort of exposure in the past as well, the role that you've held recently and so on. But over to you, Sean, for your remarks. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Kumara Guru Garu. I have to say it's a great privilege for me to come back after our first iteration with the journalists, but I should say maybe also a little intimidating since we're addressing IR scholars. It's giving me flashbacks to my undergraduate studies 25 years ago. I actually studied comparative politics myself, so a lot of IR theory. I remember, I'm sure you've all read already, but I would highly recommend, I hope it's still relevant in your field, the book by Alexander George, Bridging the Gap. That turned out to be a very useful book. At the time, I didn't plan on going into the diplomatic service, but, the illustration of the massive gap between theory and practice in foreign relations, this is really on you as a profession to bridge that gap. And I think Mr. George makes some great suggestions to that end. But there's suggestions that at least in my diplomatic service, the United States, we still have yet to fully implement. But we could all benefit, practitioners, academicians, from a fuller discussion and exploration of what these new initiatives globally, bilaterally, multilaterally mean in the context of IR theory. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing from all of you. And I will just really briefly, as mentioned, give an overview from our perspective first. It's a great privilege to represent the Consulate General here in Hyderabad for me personally, and on behalf of the Consul General, Mr. Reifman. It's a great privilege to help sponsor this event with ISB. I was actually just on a call last night with Washington about some of the incredible bilateral cooperation, specifically around border control, export control, import control, that is burgeoning between our two countries, the kind of cooperation that was really unthinkable 10, 15 years ago. But I brought up the fact that, I'm doing this today, and actually, there's a very strong resonance in US government circles who deal with India and South Asia for the Indian School of Business. We're well aware of the reputation and capacity. So, for us, this is a privilege to be able to be a part of this series on the Indo-Pacific. As Guru mentioned, I was asked to speak again today in part because of my recent experience as the Indo-Pacific Strategy Officer assigned at Embassy Colombo in Sri Lanka. Whereas you can imagine, and I hope this comes up, there's a very different, colloquial or conventional wisdom understanding of what this thing is, specifically the United States' Indo-Pacific strategy, but also more broadly, the concept of the Indo-Pacific. So I think what would make the most sense of, the 2 to 3 minutes that I'd like to limit myself to here is not giving you a definition of the Indo-Pacific or the Indo-Pacific strategy. There's actually a lot of documents available online from the former and current administration in the United States about the Indo-Pacific strategy. Have at it. What I would like to rather focus on is what the Indo-Pacific strategy is not, and then give you some very recent examples. Our Secretary of State was just in Delhi yesterday. Some very recent, fresh stuff that has not necessarily hit the press, but examples of how we are working together bilaterally, furthering this joint vision of the Indo-Pacific. So again, beyond the United States Indo-Pacific strategy, but really more broadly in the bilateral context, the joint vision of the Indo-Pacific. So really quickly, what it's not is, this is not an effort to contain China. Okay, I just want to throw it out there immediately. And I think I was speaking earlier about the conventional wisdom of how this is perceived in different parts of the region and the world. And yes, it's understandable that some people would think, oh, this must just be great power competition between the United States and China, and therefore, this is the U.S. answer to the Belt and Road or something. I can tell you honestly that nothing could be further from the truth. In many ways, this is the continuation of a longstanding U.S. policy priority, which is engagement with Asia. You remember the pivot to Asia. You remember resets. You remember the upping of U.S. representation at ASEAN. We have a full-fledged ambassador there now. Our representation engagement with the APEC. And then also, bilaterally with India. This is just in a different place, our relationship, than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, for sure. So from the perspective of the United States, and from the perspective of a bureaucrat in the trenches, I can assure you that this is not, the American answer to the Belt and Road or some effort to contain China. This is not, in our view, a new Cold War. We welcome stiff strategic competition with the People's Republic of China. We really do. We recognize that our interests do not align in many places, but I would also add that they do in others. We've had great cooperation with Beijing on issues like counterterrorism, for example, maritime piracy in certain areas. But we also need to recognize the reality of the situation on the ground today. And there are serious concerns that the United States has about threats to a free and open Indo-Pacific. The United States has been a Pacific power almost since its inception, and definitely since the mid-19th century. You probably obviously think of the Mexican-American War and the expansion of the United States to the Pacific coast, California. But also, in 1853, Commodore Perry was the first from the United States, not the UK or Japan or Russia, to open up Japan. And in 1854, really historic treaties with foreign powers to open Japan to the world. And so since the end of World War II, there has been a general consensus about freedom of navigation, free and open governance, at least a trajectory toward that end after the horrors of the Second World War concluded that, this is not a self-fulfilling regime. And I think that's the recognition policymakers and scholars are coming around to. This is not a self-sustaining thing. We take it for granted that, oh, well, of course, the sea lanes should be free and open, and 60% of the world's crude oil, for example, flows through Sri Lanka's exclusive economic zone. But I think the Indo-Pacific strategy and the broader bilateral U.S.-Indo vision for the future of this region recognizes that those things, those regimes, free and open regimes, cannot be taken for granted. So, really quickly, if I may pivot, then I'd just like to give you a quick taste of what I mean in specifics. Because when I was studying IR theory, and I don't know how your scholars are there, I was always frustrated when representative governments would give big, vague outlines and then scurry away instead of taking questions. So let me try and flesh it out a little bit by giving you some specifics. I'm still going to scurry away and not take questions, by the way. But anyway, really quickly, before our real experts take over, as you know, the secretary was just here. We're very happy to report that he had excellent meetings with the highest levels of the Indian government, including the Prime Minister and External Affairs Minister. And this partnership between our two countries is built on a number of things. And this is also to flesh out what I mean when I say this is not some grand military strategy to contain China. From our perspective, the Indo-Pacific strategy has three pillars, one of which does relate to security of navigation, for example, freedom of movement. But the other two, which are really the beefier ones, are governance and economic partnership. And that's really where we've been focused with our bilateral relationship with India. There is some great mill-to-mill cooperation taking place, but, a lot of the potential in this relationship is going to come from our strategic partnership around things like cultural, education, economic benefits. And to illustrate that, the Fulbright program, only in 2008, India became a full-fledged partner of the Fulbright program, which sends Indian scholars to the United States, among other things. And so in FY 2019, this funding provided 66 Indian scholars Fulbrights in the United States, 80 US students here, including 29 of whom were English teaching assistants, and 55 Indian students, including 13 foreign language teaching assistants. You may have heard, and this is especially pertinent for us here in Hyderabad, Telugu is the fastest growing language in the United States. This is true. And actually, we think evidence of our deepening partnership and cooperation. We welcome also India's presidency this year. We're only into the first 6 months of a 2-year term as president of the Security Council. And I think there's a lot more that's going to be said on that in the near future. I am not at liberty to step on US-UN's toes. That's our mission to the United States or the Bureau of International Organization Affairs. But we're to give you a preview, we're very excited about the potential for cooperation in the international system with India at the lead, at the helm of the Security Council. Pacific, regionally, I think you really cannot talk about without talking about the Quad. This is fascinating. This is something that has grown to rather quickly to address security issues, because it's not uncommon to have ad hoc multilateral arrangements, but it is rare for them to address security issues because governments jealously guard their sovereign right to deal with security issues bilaterally on a case-by-case basis and through established channels in the international system, like the United Nations system, which, don't forget, is at the end of the day a collective security arrangement. But the Quad doesn't just encompass trade and bilateral economic issues, but has since very early on jumped onto security issues, freedom of navigation, climate change, which is one of the probably most promising areas of the strategic cooperation or the strategic bilateral partnership between our countries in the next 2 years, from our perspective. Infrastructure investment, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, and finally, of course, maritime security, which is where a lot of the attention goes. But I think not enough attention, at least by the press in our countries, has been paid to what's happening beneath the maritime security level. Okay, just really quickly, defense cooperation, as I alluded to very briefly, and maybe underplayed a little bit because that's the purview of the Defense Department and they get all the glory. But this is incredible. Anybody who has any passing familiarization with the US-India relationship over the last couple of decades is awed every time that they look at the list of what's going on. We've just had assigned to New Delhi, probably the guy most suited for the job in our foreign service, the Chargé d'Affaires Ambassador Atul Keshav, who I had the great pleasure of working for in Sri Lanka, but is so attuned to this relationship in part because of his prior service in Embassy New Delhi political section. And I have to relay what he relayed to us, and that is, this is incredible. From an historic perspective, just over the last couple of decades, the degree of cooperation is such that we should be very proud of where we are in the sense of deepening that relationship. So the US-India Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but it's definitely worth digging into. This has spillover effects, by the way, as does a lot of defense materiel production into other areas of economic growth potential. We follow very closely DRDO, and even there's a laboratory here in our district that has worked recently, for example, on Akash missiles, which the DRDO announced could be exported to other places in Southeast Asia. The innovation happening around defense material production is incredible. And a lot of that, we would like to believe, because it's true, has been spurred in part by US investment. There's a lot of even the indigenous created systems here in India. There's spillover ecosystem effects that happen when we do things like make $20 billion in investments as of 2020 in defense sales to India. And then, of course, Tata Boeing and Tata Lockheed Martin are both here in Hyderabad, creating material that services our defense forces and others around the world. So the COVID pandemic cooperation, I have been very impressed with. I don't think it's my role here to go too deeply into that. But if you want more information, we're happy to provide it. I think the story, frankly, has shifted to impressive rates of vaccinations, at least in our consular district in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. And we recently read a sero study from the National Institute of Nutrition, I believe, that combined the effects, or the analysis sought to combine the effects of upping vaccine rates and naturally acquired immunity, and they found seropositivity of like 60%, which is pretty close to what we need to say that this third wave, purported third wave, will not be as intense as the second. So that's good news all around. We hope it comes to fruition. I am not a prophet on this. Don't take anything I say to the bank. And then finally, really quickly, I did want to mention climate because I alluded to it at the top. If you'll forgive me, Guru, but this is, like I said, probably one of the areas with the most potential for our strategic relationship. Special envoy for climate, Kerry, has been here in April, and his staff, I can assure you, are breaking down the door to numerous ministries on the Indian side who have responded with great enthusiasm as well. The Leaders Summit on Climate in April, the President and Prime Minister Modi both pledged that by the end of this current decade to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, and a lot of that is meant to be collaborative. One of our roles here in the consulate is to follow a lot of the green energy R&D development investments, and actually those go both ways. The story has always been U.S. FDI in India, especially in this area, but there is quite a bit of interesting Indian investment going into the United States, and I think recognition on the part of a lot of U.S. companies that Indian talent here is not just for poaching, but actually, the flow can go the other way, such that Indian entrepreneurs are creating U.S. jobs and joint ventures with U.S. companies. We think there's a lot of space for collaboration in big batteries, other green tech, electric vehicles. Obviously, I almost feel like that's been talked about to death, but it's coming. And then the Agenda 2030 partnership. This is a big deal. Not just from Special Envoy Kerry's office, but also by our Department of Energy in the United States. We're going to launch the new Climate Action and Finance Mobilization Dialogue, which will be jointly led by, I believe, Special Envoy Kerry's office and Secretary Granholm, the new Energy Secretary in the United States. And then finally, we are looking forward with bated breath to the 26th Conference of the Parties in Glasgow in November. So I don't know, but I would like to hold out hope that some of that could be in person, but I have no idea. Anyway, so that's a quick rundown, Guru. I hope that's helpful of some of the highlights coming out of the strategic partnership thus far on our side. And I hope that will inform the discussion about the broader Indo-Pacific, because, at least from our perspective, you cannot talk about the Indo-Pacific without talking about India and India's place in the region defined by the oceans. So we look forward very much to hearing what you all have to say, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Sean.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Over to you, Sridhar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean, for this wonderful remarks. You've given a good perspective from the US point of view. We'll now go to the next session of this. In fact, the Indo-Pacific is emerging as a new area of importance, driven by the common interests and convergences of several strategic powers, each with their own set of influences and ambitions. There are at least, to put it in a framework of this current workshop, we can see that there are at least 4 emerging geostrategic and geoeconomic shifts, and we will be trying to deal with each one of it through one session each. Maritime and blue economy is one, the evolving geopolitics of regional and sub-regional cooperation within the Indo-Pacific, and security strategy. And the 4th one is about the rise of China, is broadly the areas that are very critical to understand the Indo-Pacific issues. In the day-long proceedings, we will be attempting to cover all these issues. To start with, we have none other than Vice Admiral retired Girish Luthra. Please welcome him. I'm sure we can give a virtual clap. It's my pleasure to introduce him. In fact, he's a very great singer. We all follow his YouTube channel. There are lakhs of people who follow it. So I would request you to please subscribe this channel and take it forward. So Vice Admiral Luthra is the former Commander-in-Chief of Western Naval Command and Southern Naval Command, Indian Navy, and retired in 2019. And after nearly 40 years of his service, he's a navigation and direction specialist. He has commanded frontline warships, including aircraft carriers, the prestigious INS Virat, and the Western Fleet. He has held key positions heading policy and plans, operations, foreign cooperation, and net assessment and disaster management. An alumnus of Defense Services Staff College, India, and Naval War College, US. He has been Deputy Naval Advisor at High Commission of India, London. He has steered participation of key official documents like Indian Maritime Doctrine, Maritime Capability Perspective Plan, and Defense Space Roadmap 2030, and has authored numerous research papers. And he's the former chairman of Maritime History Society, Mumbai, and trustee chairman of Sea Credit Corps, India. Post his superannuation, he has been managing director of a biotech company and advisor with a leading corporate house, and distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. For his distinguished service of every order, he has been awarded Virasat Visisht Seva Medal in 2008, Ati Visisht Seva Medal in 2012, and Param Visisht Seva Medal in 2017 by the President of India. So with that background, I would request Admiral to talk about. But before that, just take small things. Admiral will be making a presentation and will be talking for about for 50 to 55 minutes. And then we'll be open for a QA discussion. So meanwhile, you can keep typing your questions in the chat box, and during the QA sessions, I'll pick up the questions and we'll discuss. Over to you, Admiral Luthra.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar. Let me first share my screen before I begin. Okay, first, let me thank ISB and the US Consulate in Hyderabad for this opportunity to interact with young minds and scholars on this very important issue, very key issue of the Indo-Pacific. And I will be covering today's talk, giving some details about emergence of the Indo-Pacific, what are the outlook, posture, and approaches of key players in this region. I will then cover a bit about maritime security, and then highlight India's interests, outlook, and engagement before concluding. Now, as students of international relations, most of you know that we are witnessing a very new type of internationalism and very hazy geopolitics. This is something very different, which hasn't been seen before. And this has exposed the inadequacies of traditional instruments of international cooperation. We have also, in the last few years, seen this sort of conflict between nationalism, the forces of nationalism and forces of globalization coming on a kind of a collision course with each other. The traditional security concepts, many concepts that we all studied about collective security, collective defense, cooperative security, balance of power, some of them have become quite fuzzy in the current environment. And the new norm is really strategy of hedging, where you have states, cooperating with one group for economic purposes, another group for security purposes, and trying to draw out the best from these, cooperation. As far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, it has now, there was a lot of debate earlier whether Indo-Pacific is a coherent strategic space, but now that debate is behind us. Everybody recognizes and understands that it is a coherent strategic space, and coherent strategic space simply because it is the area of connectedness, interconnectedness, and at the same time, an arena of geopolitical contestation. This focus on Indo-Pacific, as you know, has been caused by a shift in global economic activity and power to Asia, 60% of the global GDP, about 66% of the global growth in GDP, and 70% of the global world trade is taking place in the Indo-Pacific region. This region, of course, it is a very wide, very big region, and there are peculiarities, I will come to that, of each sub-region within the Indo-Pacific. But the broader Indo-Pacific, there are differences in its interpretation of its geographical expanse. Some countries like the US, Australia, consider it from the west coast of US to the west coast of India, whereas countries like India, France, Japan, and now the EU include the east coast of Africa, the area from east coast of Africa to the Pacific in this area. The importance of maritime commons has also become a very important subject. I do not recall, before 2010 or 2008 or 2010, before that period, I do not recall whenever two heads of states met that maritime security found a prominent place in the joint communique or in the statement that was issued after the summit or after the heads of state talks. But it became a regular feature in the last few years, and not just a regular feature, but found its place right at the top. And subsequently on Indo-Pacific, gradually more and more countries have spelled out their strategies, their stance, and their pronouncements. Now, in this movement, as Sean mentioned a little while ago, the US had announced quite some time back at Shangri-La Dialogue about the US pivot to Asia. And it was also termed as US rebalance to Asia, which meant deploying increased military forces to East Asia region. And subsequently, the United States also renamed the Pacific Command as the Indo-Pacific Command. It, of course, has had a strong Western Pacific focus. The freedom of navigation operations, FONOPs, which have been continued by the United States since 1979 or so, really picked up momentum in the last few years in the Western Pacific. In escalation of US-China competition, we have seen in the Trump administration the tariff issues or tariff wars, as those were being referred to, escalate to new levels. Within the Indo-Pacific region, we have seen rise, assertiveness, aggressiveness of China, and this has been seen in South and East China Seas, in the context of Taiwan, with respect to Japan, a number of issues that have come up in their relationship with Japan, including Senkaku Islands, with Philippines, off the coast of Philippines, with Indonesia, rapidly downward spiral in the relations with Australia since 2018, a border standoff with India, which this audience is very well familiar with, particularly in the last year, of course, starting earlier with Doklam and then in other places, but culminating last year in the standoff in the eastern Ladakh sector. And of course, the challenges that we have seen in Hong Kong. Also within the Indo-Pacific, we've seen the finalization of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, RCEP as it is called, which has ASEAN +5. There are new investments that have been made by a number of countries in Africa and the Middle East. We have seen significant enhancement in naval deployments, exercises, as well as setting up of new military facilities in the Indo-Pacific region. There are conflicts and tensions, and realignments have taken place substantially in the Middle East and in the Persian Gulf region. Now, let me speak a little bit about how each of the countries who have spelled out their Indo-Pacific strategy, how they are looking at the region. The US, of course, has been looking at this region for a long time, but in 2017, in its national security strategy, it included a separate section on the Indo-Pacific. This was followed by a more comprehensive Indo-Pacific Strategy Report, IPSR, in mid of 2019, where the US referred to China as a revisionist power and Russia a revitalized malign actor. It also, of course, talked about North Korea. It focused on deepening partnerships and on enhancing preparedness in the region. There was a lot of stress on safe and secure maritime commons, free and fair trade, and adherence to rules and norms. In 2019, the same year, the US also announced Blue Dot Network, which was another connectivity for quality infrastructure development in the region as one of the connectivity initiatives, where private sector participation was also included. The US has been focusing on sustaining US influence in the region. In addition to promotion of democracy and human rights, promotion of democracy, because there is this concern, not just in the US, but in different parts of the world, that democracy could possibly be facing a challenge or could be facing a decline, being opposed by state-led authoritarianism. Similarly, concerns about human rights. There has been increased engagement of the United States in this region and stepping up of naval exercises. In March 2021, the US became a key partner or one of the prominent partners of the formalized Quad. Although I mentioned March 21 because that is when the summit was held, and in a sense it was sort of the Quad arrangement was formalized through a joint statement at the end of the summit. Although Quad 2.0, as it is referred to, has been in the works since about 2017, and before the March 2021 statement, about 4 years of work by the 4 countries, by the foreign ministers, by different teams, by the working groups. A lot of work had gone into preparing for the joint statement and getting the leader summit ready. The US has had a very strong posture on Taiwan. We are seeing the changes taking place even now on Hong Kong and on Xinjiang province, where there has been a focus related to human rights. We have seen in the last 20 years, we have seen the rise of China with a new strategic identity. I say strategic identity because China earlier was predominantly a continental power, but it has changed successfully changed its strategic identity to a strong maritime power of significance. It is true that China has been a maritime power in the past as well, but this turn to the sea and this level of maritime orientation and maritime power has perhaps not been seen in the Chinese history. Today, the PLA Navy is regarded as the biggest navy in the world in just plain numbers, although capability is a very different thing. It is not counted just by numbers, but in sheer numbers alone, PLA Navy is now officially the largest navy of the world. And there has been a decisive shift to the maritime orientation simply because China recognized for its great power ambitions, a turn to the sea and a maritime orientation was necessary. Something like what the global Britain did or the United States did earlier. And China seeking new great power, a model for great power relations, sustaining its leadership in trade, and challenging US superpower status have all come to light. And here I want to mention that China has been opposed to the Indo-Pacific framework, which is the subject of our discussion today. And the Chinese foreign ministry personnel have referred to this as an idea which will, go away like, foam in the Indo-Pacific Ocean. We are also familiar with the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and which was launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping. And in 2017, I recall when I used to be speaking on this subject, I used to be referring to about 60 countries in the BRI network, and which reached a number of 130 to 135 at the start of this year. And this is a major initiative launched by President Xi Jinping, both on the land corridor and in the maritime corridor. And here there is one more point that I want to make, that while China has moved to a maritime orientation, but it is not exclusively maritime orientation. This is what I would call a hybridization of continental power and maritime power. And therefore, in the BRI itself, there is a strong continental focus, particularly in the Eurasian landmass. And of course, there is a strong maritime orientation. Very recently, a World Bank study indicated that trade in BRI corridor economies is estimated to be 30% below potential, and FDI is estimated to be 70% below potential. So there is a lot that can be done, and now we have a large number of connectivity partnerships that have come up because of some of the problems that have been highlighted in BRI. Now, officially, there is no objectives of BRI that have been spelled out. This is what I have put down because this is it is a grand vision that was put forward by President Xi Jinping with a collaborative roadmap. It was intended to aggregate projects overseas and link those projects with Sino-centric value chains, address China's resource and energy dependency, consolidate China as a regional and global power, and make strategic gains through economic cooperation. This last point is critical because gradually many countries have understood that the economic cooperation has strong political and strategic connotations, and those concerns have led to some sort of resistance. There are many other concerns related to debt trap and corruption, many lack of transparency, and those issues came up. China is aware of those limitations and has started to address them, and has including bringing in quality networks and things like that. They've come up their own quality guidelines for infrastructure projects. And BRI earlier started as an infrastructure, but it has been extended, as you know, to other domains as well. And it's not restricted to this region only. It has gone to Latin America. It has also gone to the Arctic region. China also came up with a defense white paper, which talked about seizing strategic initiative and undertook major defense reforms 3 years ago. China has developed a robust military industrial complex, which most of us have been very impressed with in the last 15-20 years. It has undertaken sale of defense equipment, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, to a large number of countries. It's been seen participating in HADR, that is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the Indo-Pacific region, and undertaken a number of oceanographic research missions in both Pacific as well as in the Indian Ocean. In the island territories, it has undertaken large-scale reclamations. I will talk about it a little later. And in the last 3 or 4 years, another area of concern has been gray zone operations by the PLA, where vessels of the fishing fleet, etc., have been used for gray zone operations. And gray zone operations are operations below hostilities and above peacetime operations. Japan has been a major proponent of the Indo-Pacific construct. In 2007, it's now widely known that PM Shinzo Abe made the speech of confluence of the two seas at the Indian Parliament. In 2016, the vision for free and open Indo-Pacific was spelled out. It is also a strong supporter of Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, SCRI, and became a key partner in the Quad, as I mentioned, in March 2021. Australia was the first country to use the term Indo-Pacific in its official language, starting with the Defense White Paper in 2013, which was amplified in 2016, further in the official communications. It has focused on capacity building and is also a partner in the Quad. ASEAN came up with ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific in 2019. It essentially talked about building on existing arrangements and promoting ASEAN centrality. The focus was on maritime and economic cooperation, connectivity, and SDG 30. ASEAN-China Code of Conduct, which has been in the works for quite some time, since about 2002. It started really as dialogue on conduct of parties in 2002, but since 2017, the ASEAN-China Code of Conduct in South China Sea has been in the making, and now it's in the final stages. The deliberations on this have been classified between ASEAN members and China. The SDNT stands for Single Draft Negotiation Text, which is under finalization, and we are expecting that this should be done. This should be likely to be completed in this year itself. Germany, UK, France, EU have also come up with their strategies. EU strategy paper was announced a few months back in April. The final document is likely by September. Germany in 2020, UK in its broader integrated review in March 2021, it had a section on tilt to the Indo-Pacific and talked about China challenge. And France has been, of course, more in Europe, in that region, France has been more proactive, also being an Indo-Pacific country itself, and a major player in the Indo-Pacific. And as far as India is concerned, Indo-French partnership in the Indo-Pacific is also been on a high in the last, particularly 7 to 8 years. India announced a concept of net security provider in Indian Ocean region in 2008. We also came up with a new maritime doctrine. In 2015, we came up with vision of security and growth for all in the region, that is Sagar. In 2018, the Prime Minister outlined India's vision of Indo-Pacific at the Shangri-La Dialogue. In 2019, the PM launched the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, IPOI, at East Asia Summit in Vietnam. And subsequently, India has put forward that IPOI and Sagar are linked and that they are trying to promote stability while following the concept of cooperative security. So the broad approach that India has taken is what is shown on the screen. And there are many commonalities with some of the Indo-Pacific partners. And similarly on this slide, as I mentioned, linking Sagar and IPOI, strengthening freedom of navigation and overflight in compliance with international maritime law, and capacity building and capability development. There are, of course, other challenges like terrorism, cyber, illicit trafficking, piracy, organized crime, migration, etc., disaster resilience, and so on. Now, the quadrilateral, as you know, Australia, India, Japan, US were the partners. This was an informal security dialogue in the period 2006-07. It was set up after the tsunami disaster of December 2004. And the Quad 1.0 sort of faded away from 2008 onwards. It was revived in 2017. And as I mentioned, the maiden summit was held on 12th of March. This was a virtual summit. An in-person summit is being planned towards the end of the year. Quad 2.0 signaled a more broad-based cooperation, a shift to a more broad-based cooperation. Earlier, the issue was the focus of primarily on maritime security. Subsequently, the scope has been expanded and many other areas have been brought under the umbrella of Quad Charter. It includes free and open Indo-Pacific, rules-based order, collective good, democratic resilience, and 3 working groups were formed at this particular summit. This slide shows areas of 10 areas of convergence that I have. This is, of course, not an official slide. This is my assessment. And in these areas, the 4 countries, A means very high level of inclination and therefore convergence in these areas. In some areas, it is B, which is particularly economic and trade partnership with Quad as the umbrella. That is still to really take some shape. And on serial 9, which is strengthening military dimension of the Quad, there is again, I've shown India as C, having the least inclination as far as this element is concerned. Now, let me turn to maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. In the beginning, I want to mention that maritime security environment is very peculiar compared to security on land borders. The environment is difficult, the challenges are different, very different. I often used to mention that on land borders, if you are on a China border or Pakistan border, on the other side of the border, on let's say Indo-China border, on the other side, you will see Chinese. But you leave any harbor, whether Mumbai harbor or any other harbor in the world, you have ships and warships as well as merchant ships from all nationalities from all around the world. It is a dense environment which is used for trade and economic as well as security purposes. And it is a very different type of environment. And therefore, it has to be, the maritime security is seen in a much broader sense than security on land borders. And I'm talking here about traditional security. There is a combination of threats, challenges, opportunities. I will describe them a little later. And these are both traditional. They can be categorized under traditional and non-traditional. But here, I want to highlight that the difference between traditional and non-traditional threats and challenges, or the what is understood as the difference, that gap is sort of narrowing and it has become fuzzy because many times non-traditional threats can so easily translate into traditional threats and lead to sort of state-on-state wars. And as I mentioned earlier, nature of threats and challenges differ in different sub-regions of the Indo-Pacific. The threats which are in the Western Indian Ocean, in the Persian Gulf region, East Africa, Horn of Africa, in that area are very different from threats which are in the Central Indian Ocean or the South Asia region to Southeast Asia, and threats which are there in the Western Pacific. Now, broadly, traditional security threats and challenges we can look at in the Indo-Pacific region from the point of view of state-centric disputes and armed conflict. There are sovereignty-related disputes. There are sovereign rights-related disputes. Now, sovereign rights-related disputes are particularly applicable in the maritime domain. There are ideological and ethnic disputes, civil wars. There is trade disruption or trade wars, and threats to offshore and coastal infrastructure in the maritime domain. These are traditional security threats and challenges in the maritime domain. Similarly, non-traditional threats include terrorism, including maritime terrorism, piracy, armed robbery, organized crime, unlawful acts, illicit trafficking of arms, narcotics, human beings, financial flows, illicit financial flows, maritime militia and gray zone operations, which I referred to a little while ago, illegal, unreported fishing, environmental, climate, and biodiversity challenges, which are also now major challenges in the maritime domain. Now, as far as the Indian Ocean part of the Indo-Pacific is concerned, we have over 1 lakh ships that transit Indian Ocean region every year, 100,000, and over 60,000 transit the Malacca every year. The shipping lanes in the region are critical for trade and energy security because 66% of the world's oil, 33% of the cargo, bulk cargo, and 50% of the container shipments are passing through this region. Within the region, the maritime domain awareness is critical. This slide depicts what is shown in blue dots and green dots and red dots. These are all ships at sea. There are thousands and thousands of ships which are in these waters following different routes, and keeping track of these ships requires good cooperation amongst countries and having a strong maritime domain awareness. It is also important from security point of view for any military operations. In the Western Indian Ocean, a number of task forces were formed. Some of them were formed after the Gulf War, and some of them were formed after the global war on terror. Some are related to anti-piracy. Some are formed under the NATO umbrella, some under the EU umbrella, some under the formed by the US partnership on maritime terrorism and security in the region. There are over 100 extra-regional. Extra-regional means warships which are not from this area, ships and submarines, but from navies which are outside of this region. And at an average, more than 100 ships are operating in this region. And these are from more than 30 countries outside of the Indian Ocean region. Similarly, in the Western Pacific, we have the South and East China disputes, which have been a serious cause of concern and discussion for a long time, both in South China Sea and in East China Sea. And there has been a deterioration on these issues. We can discuss these in some detail later, depending upon the questions that we may have. China's assertiveness in the South China Sea, East China Sea, in the Western Pacific, and its promulgation of the 9-dash line, where it sort of included the entire South China Sea and East China Sea into its own area and its own domain, which was subsequently in the arbitration that was taken up by Philippines, was refused, that there are no historical claims as far as 9-dash line is concerned. And these historical claims of China were turned down by the arbitration. But China refused to accept that arbitration, and stating that they never even participated in the arbitration proceedings because it was one-sided and they are not in agreement and will not be abiding by the decisions of this arbitration. China has undertaken, as I mentioned earlier, land reclamations and also built artificial islands. There are more than 500 acres of land reclamation has been done, and a number of airfields, harbors, surveillance equipment, and logistic support arrangements have been made in different islands and reefs in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. While at one point, President Xi Jinping did make a statement that China would not be undertaking militarization of islands, but that is exactly what has happened, and a large number of islands have actually been militarized. There have been a number of incidents for years now, and these have only increased at sea between China and Vietnam, between China and Philippines, between China and Indonesia, where the ships got challenged, where in some cases firing happened, and notwithstanding that they have, as part of the ongoing dialogue with ASEAN, there is the Q's process for unplanned encounters at sea. That is what is to be done in case of an unplanned encounter. But notwithstanding that agreement, there have been a number of these incidents at sea, and the security environment has been deteriorating and is very, very fragile. PLA Navy, we have seen a rapid growth. We have not seen a growth in maybe in 100 years. We have not seen growth like this at this rapid pace of a Navy. It has expanded its operations. When I was undertaking my staff course, in 94, 95, PLA Navy was a brown water Navy. We used to talk about a Navy which was restricted to its coastal areas. And till 1999, actually, the PLA Navy was not seen in the Indian Ocean region. It never used to make any port calls. And subsequently, it is, since around 2007, it has been making about 20 to 30 port calls in a year since that period. It has averaged 6 to 8 ships deployed in the Indian Ocean region. This number goes up to 12 to 14 at times. The average is 6 to 8. It has long deployment cycles. Ships are deployed for periods like 5 to 6 months. and including sometimes getting deployed to the Mediterranean and going beyond to the Baltic and going to the Western European ports as well. It has undertaken conventional and nuclear submarine deployments to the region. It inaugurated the Djibouti naval base 3 years ago. Once again, China had earlier said that it has no plans of setting up a military base, but Djibouti base did. So, as I was explaining, there has been rapid growth of PLA Navy, and we've seen a large number of ships and submarines being deployed in the Indian Ocean region, which wasn't the case earlier, averaging 6 to 8 ships, which goes up to 12 to 14. And these follow long deployment cycles, including getting deployed to Mediterranean and the Western European ports. There are submarine deployments as well. Contrary to what China has been saying, they inaugurated the Djibouti naval base 3 years ago, and it has stepped up cooperation with Russia and Pakistan. The maritime security cooperation frameworks at diplomatic and operational levels, and also there are a number of cooperative frameworks at bilateral and multilateral levels. Here, what I want to mention is that these frameworks have been evolving in the Western Indian Ocean region and compared to the Eastern Indian Ocean, because these frameworks came up much earlier in the Eastern Indian Ocean and in Southeast Asia and in the Western Pacific, whereas they are still sort of in infancy in the Western Indian Ocean region. In the Eastern Indo-Pacific, we have ARF, ASEAN Regional Forum, East Asia Summit, ADMM Plus, which is ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum, ARF, ISM is intersessional meeting on maritime security. There is RECAP, which is basically for armed robbery and piracy, CSCAP, which is under the Asia Pacific, and the recent addition has been Quad. We also have the Indian Ocean Commission, which is focused more on the Western Indian Ocean region with the island countries. IORA, Indian Ocean Rim Association, IONS, which is an operational construct, Indian Ocean Naval Symposium, and WPNS, which is the Western Pacific Naval Symposium. Off Africa, there is Regional Maritime Security Arrangement 2018. DCOC is Djibouti Code of Conduct, which was agreed. And then there is Indian Ocean Forum on Maritime Crime. A number of information sharing arrangements have been signed, and information fusion centers have come up in different parts of the Indo-Pacific as part of maritime domain awareness, as I mentioned some time ago when I talked about MDA. Now, let me talk a little bit about India's maritime interests and outlook. India, as you know, is a peninsular landmass which juts 2,000 kilometers into the sea with a 7,500 kilometers coastline. This coastline is being revised upwards based on the taking islands and everything into account. We have nearly 1,200 islands, 2 million square kilometers of EEZ, which will expand to nearly 3.5 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone once the delineation of the continental shelf is done. India has 12 major and 200 minor ports. Now, in the maritime domain and in the navies, navies are built around maritime interests, not only around maritime threats. And the larger interests are taken into account when determining the force structure and when determining the strategy as far as the maritime sector is concerned. So India's maritime interests I have listed here, which is our sovereignty and territorial integrity against maritime threats, protecting seaborne trade and energy flows, security of Indian shipping, fishing assets, citizens in the maritime domain, peace, stability, security, and cooperation, and partnership in the maritime domain, zones and in neighborhoods, and in areas of maritime interest. Similarly, protecting our seabed resources and sea resources, blue economy, scientific ocean research, exploration, etc. So this is a sort of bucket list of India's maritime interests. And In our maritime doctrine in 2009, we defined our primary areas of interest. This is from the Navy's point of view. Primary areas of interest determined by areas where we would like to be present most of the time, and we can really look after our security interests based on our capabilities and assets available. So this is the area, as you can see on the screen, which was defined as the primary areas of interest. Similarly, secondary areas of interests were defined, including areas of Western Pacific and some islands of the Southern Pacific, and going up to Africa, Western Africa, as well as the Mediterranean. Now, the secondary areas are those areas where we at present do not have the capability to be present there on most of the times, and our sort of surveillance presence in that area is only periodic. Now, as you know, India's progress and development is strongly linked to the seas, as 95% by volume and 70% by value of our EXIM export-import trade is transacted by sea. The merchandise trade in India is 27.2% of our GDP. It has shown in the last few years, it has shown an average growth of about 4.2%. India's, and which is high, that 4.2% growth is high by the global average. Our merchant marine is 17th in the world in terms of total deadweight tonnage. We have 1,435 ships, that is the Indian ships, and therefore a significant amount of Indian trade is carried out under what we call as foreign flagged vessels. 14% of seafarers globally are Indians. So while we have much smaller number of ships in India, merchant ships in India, but the number of seafarers has been rising as a percentage of all seafarers worldwide. And this was just about 6% 15 years back and has gone up to 14%. And a large number of ships operated by different countries have seafarers who are Indians. We have a large fishing community, and we are the third largest producer but of course third by a big margin, because China is way ahead. We produce about 9 million tons of fish. China is well ahead. In terms of energy security, 96% dependence on the seas as far as India is concerned. Most of this dependence is for imports. In 96%, we have also calculated a bit of exports, because from our refineries, some of the finished products are also exported. We import about 82% of our oil requirement, which has been growing at about 7 to 8%, average of 7 to 8% annually. You know, in 2003, our consumption of oil was 122 million tons. It has gone up to 302. So it's nearly 250% increase and it's rising. Over 60% of our oil imports are from the Persian Gulf region. Primarily, the three main countries from where we import are Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And of course, India now has a major focus on blue economy through a project what you might have heard, the project Sagarmala. Indian Navy is the primary instrument for India's maritime strategy and maritime doctrine and coordination of a number of issues related to the maritime domain. The Navy itself has 132 ships and submarines, 20 aircraft, both fixed wing and rotary wing included, and a large number of ships and submarines are under construction in the Indian shipyards. The Navy is also focusing on strengthening space and cyber segments, joint operations with the Army and the Air Force, and on net centricity. Now, the roles of the Navy, typically of any Navy, and so also of the Indian Navy, are military, which is war fighting, diplomatic, where we interact with a large number of navies, and within the Indo-Pacific, there has been an uptick in bilateral and multilateral exercises in which India is participating with a number of other navies. A constabulary role where we help the government and the Coast Guard and other agencies in strengthening law and order, and benign role, which I mentioned earlier, of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, where the Navy lends a helping hand in distant places, evacuation of personnel, after natural disasters, and in the entire Indo-Pacific. This has gone on from Yemen to Philippines. India has been participating. The operational imperatives for the Indian Navy in the current times are to enhance its reach and sustenance, to undertake prolonged deployments to ensure stability in the Indo-Pacific region, to step up surveillance and patrolling in different parts of areas of interest, to undertake forward deployments. We also have a concept of operationally deployed and operationally ready ships, submarines, and aircraft. Some ships are deployed on mission-based deployments now, and some ships are kept ready in harbor for deployment at very, very short notice. And of course, within all this, the Navy has to be ready for a two-front war in one theater. When I say one theater, because as I mentioned, in the maritime domain, a two-front war does not necessarily mean two areas geographically distinct from each other. In the maritime domain, you could be facing two adversaries in the same theater. And so therefore, a two-front war, as far as the Navy is concerned, is very different from a two-front war on the land borders. The Navy has to be prepared and ready for a preemptive as well as for reactive action. We frequently undertake forward basing and forward logistics. There is, as I mentioned, jointness with other agencies, particularly Indian Army and Indian Air Force from warfighting point of view, and many other agencies from the coastal security point of view. The Navy also is highly focused on physical security, information security, and cyber security in this time that we live in of constant threats in all these domains that most of you are aware of. The Navy has stepped up cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region in line with India's vision for the Indo-Pacific. Bilateral and multilateral exercises, coordinated patrols with a large number of other navies has been undertaken. We also undertake staff talks with many other navies on a regular basis. This is an annual feature with a number of navies. We carry out training for a number of navies of Indo-Pacific region. At any given time, we have more than 1,000 trainees from different countries, and training provided by the Indian Navy has been highly appreciated in the region. There are demands for more slots to be allocated, but because of capacity constraints, we are limited in how much training slots we can offer to many other navies of the region. We also undertake surveillance, joint surveillance with countries like Maldives, Seychelles, Mauritius, and some other countries. In maritime domain awareness, we have white shipping information sharing arrangements signed with many of the partner countries. Many of them have now their Indo-Pacific strategy out. Intelligence sharing is another area that has been taken up with some friendly countries. I explained mission-based deployments, which are going on all the time, 365 days of the year, including during the COVID period. There has been no let-up in these deployments, whether the pandemic or whether you are in pandemic period or in no pandemic period. So the purpose of showing these three slides was to mention that the Indian Navy is central to India's maritime orientation. It has also been, in some sense, a thought leader on India's approach to the maritime domain, because Indian Navy came up with documents like India's Maritime Doctrine, India's Maritime Strategy, India's Maritime Security Strategy. The Maritime Security Strategy had two parts. One was in the public domain and one was in the classified domain. So a large number of these issues around the maritime domain, the the central agency in putting them together, in sort of bringing coalescence in that, has been Indian Navy in the last 15 years. In the recent times now, as I explained, in the Indo-Pacific domain, the maritime domain also, the partnerships have expanded to include many other domains, whether it is connectivity or climate or digital. And this will only grow, but the navies will also continue to play a major role in the coming days, months, and years. So in the end, let me say that Indo-Pacific as a framework is now reached a level of acceptance, despite resistance from a few countries, including, as I said, China and Russia. And now, taking this process forward, many initiatives are underway, including by the EU now recently. And therefore, this will set the stage for the security as well as diplomatic, and economic sort of environment for the region for many, many years to come. So let me stop here, and I will be happy to take on questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation. I'm sure everyone had made an extensive note of each and everything that you told. We already got a lot of questions. Probably, should I start? I mean, just to save some time.
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. In the earlier format, we did one session with the journalists, and there was a journal, Prakash Menon. So after his presentation, he told, shoot the journal. So in the same way, I would be shooting the Admiral now. Yeah. So just in the chat box, we have almost some 8-9 questions already for you. Just to read the first one, how do you, just this one, yeah. The navies undertake exercises to forge interoperability. Would a mechanism to forge or enhance interoperability in other domains like health, business, etc., be useful? If yes, how is this going to be addressed? This is a question from Rituraj Mate. How would you like to take this up? Like one after the other, or should I read a couple of questions? You will.
Yeah, we can do maybe 2 questions at a time.
Perfect. Okay. So this is from Rituraj, and the second one I would like to read is from Sancheti Ghosh. Since India has different policies of Act East and Act West, how does India look at the 2 maritime spaces, the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal? And how can we locate these 2 spaces in India's vision of Indo-Pacific? Okay,
as far as health, etc., and integrating those into some architecture or framework, you see, this there is a strong possibility, and that is my recommendation as well, that now that in the Indo-Pacific construct we have a larger range of issues being discussed, it would be better if a framework is enunciated by the Quad, for example. And while the Quad has made a joint statement has been issued, one would recommend that at the next leader summit, a framework is evolved by the Quad. And that framework should be put forward by the Quad. Under the framework, then specific initiatives and actions can be, because if there is no framework, the entire region and all people would be very confused. So therefore, there is a need to provide a framework, and what that framework should look like. For example, it should have 5 or 6 pillars in that framework. 5 or 6 pillars could be on rules-based, rules-based order can be one, maritime security can be one, public goods like climate, etc., can be put under one. So under that framework, partnerships and collaboration need to progress. And because it is not just Navy to Navy, and while in that maritime security pillar can be with the navies, but it is now government to government, and therefore we will need to evolve a framework. And my personal recommendation is that we need to do it maybe under the Quad framework. And the second question about West and East, Act West. You see, in the maritime domain, of course, as I mentioned, in each sub-region, the challenges are different, priorities are different. We have a strong population, as you know, of personnel of Indian origin in West Asia, and our interests in the Persian Gulf region are significant, and maritime security is a major challenge there. You know what happened in 2019 off Fujairah, where ships came under attack, explosives were planted and ships were attacked. You know what happened about drone attacks in that area, including the Aramco airfields. You know about downing of drones in the Persian Gulf, and you know about the hijacking of tankers in that area. All these things happen. So the maritime security there is very, very crucial to India. And India has cultural links, historical links, and now a very strong evolving economic partnership with the Gulf region, as also with the African region. But as you know, this has been, in my view, a major success story, where our relationships with countries like UAE, countries like Saudi Arabia has seen a significant upward movement, and a lot of investments, that are and economic partnerships that have already taken off, and the investments that are being made from both sides. So in economic, historical, cultural, in all aspects, this region is very important to India. Although, as I mentioned earlier, with the American perspective, it is not part of the Indo-Pacific region from their perspective, but from our perspective, it is very much part of the Indo-Pacific region. And we certainly would like to focus a lot on this region as well. At the same time, it is on the eastern side, we have major interests in Southeast Asia. We have Bay of Bengal, we have BIMSTEC arrangement, and we have Bay of Bengal community arrangement. And now we have major interests in the Western Pacific. So we are looking at it as an entire region with optimizing priorities and optimizing initiatives which are specific to a particular sub-region or specific to a particular country. So it is the integration is at the Indo-Pacific region-wide, but the demands and the requirements and specific initiatives will be sub-region-wise or country-wise.
Okay, thank you. We just have 5 more minutes. The next question is from Amrita. Like Eastern European interests in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, she wanted to know about that. Can European countries plug into Indian maritime interests in the Indian Ocean, as against US emphasizes on the Pacific side of the things? Can you respond to that?
Yeah. So you see, EU has come up with what they call as Council conclusions. The Foreign Council of the EU in April announced the Council conclusions on Indo-Pacific. Council conclusions they were added the word cooperation in their title. Council conclusions on cooperation in the Indo-Pacific, because they were very particular to include this word, because the EU is also trying to do a very fine balancing act on the Indo-Pacific as with regard to China. Going forward, we will have to see how that plays out, because in my opinion, it is going to be very, very difficult. And you see, the important thing to note is that this came up. The EU's Council conclusions on Indo-Pacific strategy came up in April, 4 months after the EU had finalized their agreement on Comprehensive Investment Agreement, CIA, which was signed with China, an investment agreement which was signed in December. 4 months later, the Indo-Pacific strategy they came up. So they are trying to concurrently balance the their interests as far as China is concerned. but specific to alignment of EU's interests in Indo-Pacific, I will make 3 or 4 points. One, EU as a union, while as I mentioned, France has been very proactive in the Indo-Pacific, right up to the Western Pacific, because they have, and Southern Pacific, as also in the Western Indian Ocean region, in the entire Indian Ocean. So the second country from Europe, which has been active in the region, has been UK. But with Brexit, with UK leaving the European Union, now European Union's difficulty is that the hard power or the physical presence of naval assets is really restricted to France. Other countries do not have the force availability for deployment in the entire Indo-Pacific region, and their capabilities currently are limited, and that is why most of their deployments have been in the Horn of Africa area under UNAV4, and they have been limited to the Horn of Africa, Persian Gulf region. I expect that to continue, but where EU will step up and is stepping up its partnership with India, you know, the free trade area discussions are in progress. You know that the connectivity partnership between India and EU has been signed already a couple of months back. So in connectivity and in trade, there will be major focus. In resilient supply chains, there will be major focus. And as far as naval presence is concerned, it will depend largely on countries like France. But broadly, if we see Europe's arrival in the Indo-Pacific, or EU's arrival, you know, EU had withdrawn from the Indo-Pacific, you know, after the Second World War, so to say. But EU's arrival again in the Indo-Pacific, from India's point of view, is a welcome sign to my mind. And also with the agenda that we have for the Indo-Pacific, including on you know, norms, rules-based order, etc. Because EU has been, particularly on the trade side in WTO, EU has been very, very particular on transparency and rules-based order in trade, and not to use trade as a weapon, which is now the policy as far as China is concerned. So EU is alignment with some of the objectives of Indo-Pacific are good. And from Indian point of view, EU's deepening engagements in the Indo-Pacific region will be very beneficial.
Okay, I think I'm afraid we'll have a time for one last question. Sorry for that. We are pouring with a lot of questions. Probably what I will do is I will compile these questions and send it to you, Admiral. Maybe whenever you get time, you can respond back. We'll see. So probably the last question is from Shivika Dubeja. Why do you think India is not inclined to strengthen military dimension of the Quad? Does it stand to lose anything if India, is inclined towards the same?
India has, one is that India has historically been opposed to the idea of, military alliances. While there has been a breakaway from the non-aligned, sort of thinking, non-alignment kind of thinking, but India's major way of thinking is that in the current environment, a number of partnerships, minilateral, because alliance structures like the Cold War or Cold War type of alliance structures can create their own problems, whereas a network of cooperative agreements in a multipolar environment is what India is more keen and more comfortable with. And rather than reverting to a 2 or 3 power competition with alliance frameworks then sets you up for something like the Warsaw Pact, NATO kind of arrangement. And India doesn't want to go down that route. And in today's world, perhaps it is not it does not get much traction. It is not highly acceptable also in many parts of the world. Many countries, not just India, are, and that is one concern about Quad, as there has been a concern about Quad, whether Quad is an emerging sort of alliance arrangement, which India has been, and now day before yesterday, Secretary Blinken also mentioned that it is not an alliance net. It is not developing into a military alliance. He also made that statement, because these are concerns which are there amongst people, that whether that it may not be a military alliance today, but whether it is a military alliance in the making. Now, while you and I can say that it is too early to tell what will happen in the future, 10 years down the line or 15 years down the line, we cannot predict in what shape and form any such collaborative venture will take. But today, most countries, including India, are not comfortable with the idea of an alliance framework which resembles a NATO kind of NATO Warsaw kind of face off in this area, because that would increase or that would, instead of making the environment more stable, could actually lead to instability. And therefore these loose architecture of a web of architecture of partnerships, trilaterals, quadrilaterals. Within the quadrilateral there are trilaterals. Of all the trilaterals possible except one, I think all trilaterals exist. And within the trilaterals, there are bilaterals. So you build upon, so it's not, the Quad is not just a standalone thing. Within Quad there are so many trilaterals. So these partnerships can build, and on this foundation, you can try and build a stable and secure environment. That is India's thinking at present, on this loose web architecture, rather than a strong alliance, military alliance framework pitched against a real or an imaginary adversary.
Excellent. So I'm afraid we'll have to stop it here. We have a lot of questions. I can keep on reading very interesting ones rather, but we'll stop here, sir. I hope this session was really engaging and very useful. And Admiral Luthra gave a very interesting perspective on dealt with maritime issues. So we will take a short 5 minutes break, or maybe less, and for the next session. And Professor Mohapatra is also is ready. In fact, he will be joining at any time. But we will take a 5 minutes break and allow you to stretch your hand and arms and come back and with a cup of tea. Vice Admiral, thank you very much for sparing your valuable time, and I hope you too enjoyed your session. And we really learned a lot from this session. So we look to keep engaging with you in such platforms. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.